Welcome to session 192 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started this series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 11th of July. Today we'll be looking at Ezekiel 28 to 30 and Psalm 37. But so far in Ezekiel, we've read through Ezekiel's commissioning, his prophetic acts, we finished the accusations against Judah, and then we started the accusations against the foreign nations. The book started 5 years after the first group of Israelites had been exiled to Babylon. Jerusalem was still standing and many Israelites still lived there. Ezekiel received a vision of God on his chariot throne over Babylon. He was not limited to Israel. His authority was over all the earth. God charged Ezekiel with speaking to the Israelites still in Jerusalem to repent and change their ways before it was too late. But God also warned Ezekiel that the people would likely not listen to him. After taking a week to process all that he had seen and heard, Ezekiel started acting out prophetic declarations. These included making a miniature model of Jerusalem and acting out sieges against it, laying on his side while eating unclean food, and shaving his head and beard. After more time passed, God gave Ezekiel a vision of what the people were doing to his temple back in Jerusalem. From the outer gates to right inside the inner temple, the people were worshipping false gods and idols. They had desecrated the space that had been reserved for God. Ezekiel had a vision of the presence of God leaving the temple and entering his throne chariot carried by the four living beings. So God declared judgment over the people, their leaders and their prophets. God used many metaphors to depict Israel: an unfaithful bride, a proud lion now caged, a great vine that was dug up and left in the wilderness. God again laid out all of Israel's sins, and then we got the most graphic of images used so far. Israel was likened to an unfaithful woman, and God invited her other lovers to have their way with her and disfigure her. The language was highly graphic and was intended to be shocking. It was a passage that needed wrestling with before we just import it into our modern day thinking. Then finally, the siege of Jerusalem started. God's wrath was starting to pour out, and Ezekiel's mouth was free, so he could now move from declaring judgment on Israel to judgment on the foreign nations. We read through judgments on Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia. We then started the judgment of Tyre, a city-nation focused on trade, which was much longer than any of the others. Jump in with today's reading, Ezekiel 28 to 30. God now focuses on the king of Tyre. This king had become seriously arrogant and prideful. He believed that he was greater than the gods and reigned over them. He thought he was the wisest man on earth, even wiser than Daniel, who we'll meet in a later book. Through his own wisdom, he's been able to acquire wealth and power for himself. Because of this, God is going to bring foreign nations to come and strike him down. They'll take this king, who believes he reigns over the gods in heaven, and will throw him into the pits of death. Will he still try to claim he's a god then? This king is a being of pride and chaos that's trying to set himself above God. God tells Ezekiel to lament over this king, and he does this by drawing imagery from another being of pride and chaos that tried to set themselves above God. Ezekiel goes back to the Garden of Eden, and though he doesn't mention them by name, makes a comparison between the king of Tyre and the serpent of Eden. An ancient Israelite would have recognized that the serpent in Genesis 3 wasn't actually just a serpent. Serpents don't talk. It would likely have been a spiritual being posing as a serpent, and it's this imagery that Ezekiel is drawing from. The spiritual being had been made full of wisdom and perfection. He had been set up as a cherub, a guardian angel over the Garden of Eden. But sin crept in, and this spiritual being became proud, choosing its own will over God's. As a result, God cast them down to the earth and made them hated. The point here is to show that the rebellious and corrupt kings, such as the king of Tyre, are merely reflections of a much deeper spiritual rebellion that happened long before. This comparison then feeds back, because just as God is punishing these corrupt and proud kings so that he might restore nations to himself, God will one day properly punish the serpent of Eden so that he might restore the whole earth to himself. Next comes Sidon, who was a sister city to Tyre. You will often see the two mentioned together. Like many of these other nations, Sidon often caused problems for Israel. The most famous person from Sidon is Jezebel, who married King Ahab and led the nation in worshipping foreign gods and removing the worship of the true God. God will appear powerfully in Sidon, bringing his punishment and judgment. There will be pestilence and death by the sword. God will do this to remove all of these nations that have been little by little chipping away at Israel. Then God will restore his people to their land so that they may turn to him and flourish. Then comes Egypt and their Pharaoh. Pharaoh is described as a great dragon. Have a look at Ezekiel 29 verse 30. Dragons were often seen as water-dwelling creatures of pure chaos, completely opposed to the beauty and order of God. We read about a similar dragon like being in Job, the Leviathan. And God will take Pharaoh, this proud being of chaos, draw him out of his rivers where he feels safe, and then throw him into the wilderness, the place of death. Then the people of Egypt will know that he, not Pharaoh, is God over all the earth. The Israelites had trusted in Egypt and leant on them like a staff, but they were more like a staff of reeds that snapped when the Israelites put weight on it. The shattered pieces cut the Israelites, hurting them instead of supporting them. Because of this and their pride, God will attack Egypt and scatter them, but afterwards he will return and restore them. He will keep them small so they don't get proud again, but he will restore them. This little glimmer of hope for Egypt demonstrates God's desire that all the earth might know him and enjoy his blessings, not just the Israelites. Meanwhile, by this point, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon has now conquered Tyre, and so God points out that Egypt is next. God then calls for Ezekiel to announce and lament Egypt's destruction. The day of the Lord, the day of destruction and judgment is coming. God will destroy Egypt and plunder her wealth. All those who support Egypt, her allies, and those who look to her for help will be crushed. God will use Nebuchadnezzar to destroy the wealth and pride of Egypt. He will destroy all their idols and foreign gods. He will attack each of their cities, leaving none untouched. God is going to break the arms of Pharaoh and Egypt so they cannot fight back. And then he will strengthen the arm of Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon so they can destroy Egypt. But that is Ezekiel 28 to 30. But now let's look at Psalm 37. This psalm is attributed to King David and falls into the category of a wisdom psalm and instructs the reader or listener on how to lead a moral life. The psalm is an acrostic where every couple of verses start with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's also a chiasm, though a very long one due to the length of the psalm. Here's a summary of the structure, but I would recommend checking out the written version of this commentary in the description to see the structure properly for yourself. So we start with verses 1 to 8. The righteous must ignore the wicked and trust God. Verse 9, wait and inherit the land. Verses 10 to 15, the righteous will inherit the land and the wicked's plotting will be destroyed. Verse 16, the righteous are blessed. Verse 17, Yahweh upholds the righteous. The first part of verse 18, Yahweh guides the righteous. The second part of verse 18, the righteous inherit. Verse 19, the righteous get. Then we have verse 20, the wicked perish. And then we have verse 21, the righteous give. Then we have verse 22, the blessed inherit. Verse 23, Yahweh guides the righteous. Verse 24, Yahweh upholds. Verse 25 to verse 26, the righteous are not forsaken. Verses 27 to 33, the righteous will inherit the land and the wicked's plotting will be destroyed. Verse 34, wait and inherit the land. And then verse 40, God destroys the wicked but saves the righteous. The psalm opens with an encouragement not to get too concerned with the wicked. They may be successful now, but it won't last long. Instead, trust in the Lord that he will be your provision. He will cause you to dwell in his land, give you the desires of your heart, act on your behalf, and lead you into righteousness. All it requires is that you patiently wait on him, and he will cause you to prosper in a way that the wicked never could. So refrain from getting angry, because the wicked will be cut off for their evil. They will be no more, and the righteous will inherit the land. This message is repeated throughout the psalm and can be seen as the main focus of the psalm. Each pairing of verses reinforces this message. Do not become jealous of the wicked who seem to prosper. They won't. Ultimately, they will fail and fall away. Instead, live a blameless life and you will be sustained and blessed by God. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.